Mount Sinai was not a place of quiet reflection. It was an active, violently unstable intersection of the mortal and the divine, a geographical anomaly where the physical laws of the earth fractured under the sheer weight of God's presence. When Moses ascended into the thick, suffocating darkness at the summit, the ancient texts tell us the mountain burned with fire to the very heart of heaven, wrapped in black clouds and a deep, impenetrable terror. We are taught in modern times that he stayed there for 40 days and 40 nights merely to receive 2 stone tablets of moral law. A simple list of 10 commandments for a wandering, displaced people. But the mathematics of the Exodus simply do not align with that comfortable, simplistic narrative. 40 days of complete physical isolation in a highly lethal environment is a massive duration of time. It is an incubation. And according to an ancient, heavily suppressed text recovered from the desolate, wind-scoured caves of Qumran, those stone tablets were only a fraction of what was handed down in that consuming fire. While the earth below shook and the Israelites cowered in the foothills, terrified of the deafening sound of unseen trumpets, Moses was not standing before a silent, abstract deity. He was being spoken to directly by an entity the ancient Hebrew writers identified as the Malach Ha-Panim, the angel of the presence. The ancient texts do not describe a fragile messenger with feathered wings. The original language denotes a premier archangel, a terrifyingly vast entity of absolute authority who stood closest to the unapproachable light of the Creator, carrying orders that could dismantle reality itself. And what this entity dictated to Moses in the dark of the mountain was not just a moral code. It was the precise, unalterable architectural blueprint of time. This blueprint was recorded in what we now call the Book of Jubilees. For centuries, the institutional church and mainstream rabbinical authorities brushed this text aside, labeling it a minor pseudepigraphal curiosity, a lesser Genesis not worthy of serious theological study. They buried it in the margins of history, allowing the masses to forget its existence entirely. But the desert does not forget. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were dragged from the dark caves of the Judean desert, the sheer volume of fragments from the Book of Jubilees proved something undeniable. The isolated radical sect of the Essenes did not view this book as a minor curiosity or a mere historical footnote. They viewed it as the ultimate authority, the master key required to understand the hidden mechanics of the universe. The Book of Jubilees presents a reality that threatens the very foundation of how the modern world perceives biblical history. It asserts that time is not a fluid, human construct measured by the chaotic, shifting cycles of the moon. Time is a rigid, mathematical grid designed by God, divided strictly into jubilees, periods of 49 years that govern every major event from the dawn of creation to the end of days. It is a cosmic clockwork, ticking down with merciless mechanical precision. Every birth, every judgment, every demonic incursion, and every divine intervention was predestined and locked into this exact chronological ledger before the foundations of the earth were even laid. To alter the calendar, to follow the moon instead of the sun as the surrounding pagan nations did, was not a mere cultural preference or an innocent miscalculation. According to Jubilees, it was a profound spiritual treason, a deliberate blinding of humanity to the actual timing of God's judgments and the invisible movements of the spiritual realm. To lose the true calendar is to lose the ability to see the spiritual war raging all around us. It is to be caught completely off guard, asleep in the dark, when the final judgments inevitably fall. This is exactly why the text was forbidden. If you control a society's perception of time, you control their perception of reality. The suppression of the Book of Jubilees was not an accident of history or a simple oversight by ancient councils. It was a calculated theological amputation designed to sever modern man from the prophetic timeline dictated in the fires of Sinai. We have been forced onto a corrupted timeline, wandering blindly through a chronological illusion, while the true clock of the universe ticks toward its inescapable conclusion. If you seek the hidden truths of the ancient world, subscribe and join us in this investigation. The timeline you have been taught is a manufactured veil, and tonight we are going to tear it down. The angelic ledger remains intact, its prophecies mathematically absolute, and its warnings more urgent now than in the days when the Watchers first descended. The forgotten clock is still ticking, and its unseen hands are moving toward a predetermined hour. To understand the magnitude of what was stolen from us, we must first completely dismantle the modern, comfortable perception of time. The Western mind has been conditioned to view time as an empty corridor, a neutral, silent space where human beings possess the ultimate freedom to build civilizations, write histories, and chart their own destinies. We hang calendars on our walls, named after Roman emperors and medieval popes, treating the days and months as mere administrative conveniences. We believe that we are moving forward, progressing in a straight line away from the primitive darkness of our ancestors. But this is a distinctly modern, profoundly arrogant illusion. It is a psychological pacifier designed to shield us from a terrifying ancient reality. The ancient writers of the Near East did not view time as a neutral, empty corridor. They understood time as a localized, heavily occupied war zone. They did not have a word for a casual, humanly scheduled appointment. The Hebrew text uses a far more aggressive, heavy term when describing the sacred festivals and the unfolding of history. That word is moed. It translates poorly into our modern languages, often reduced to feast or season. But in its true, ancient context, a moed is a fixed, unbreakable cosmic intersection. It is an appointed time of divine ambush, a precise mathematical coordinate where the invisible spiritual realm violently intersects with the physical earth. God did not ask humanity to schedule these meetings. He dictated them. For centuries, mainstream theology has taught a sanitized version of the ancient world. We are handed a domesticated narrative where the patriarchs, the prophets, and the priests of Israel were simple, pastoral men, wandering the deserts, looking up at the moon, and doing their best to honor a distant god. We are taught that the calendar they used, a lunar calendar relying on the chaotic, shifting phases of the moon, was the divinely ordained method for tracking the ages. This is the calendar that modern rabbinic Judaism still uses today, and it is the foundation upon which much of the Christian understanding of biblical history is built. It feels ancient. It feels authentic. But according to the Book of Jubilees, it is a catastrophic lie. The text of Jubilees does not simply disagree with the lunar calendar. It condemns it as a spiritual contagion, an infection brought back from the dark, idolatrous heart of Babylon. To understand this theological treason, we must sink our hands into the dirt of the ancient world. In the ancient Near East, the empires of Babylon and Egypt did not merely study the stars for navigation. Astronomy was entirely inseparable from dark theology. The moon, with its waxing and waning, its disappearances, and its bloody eclipses, was the ultimate symbol of chaos, magic, and unpredictability. Because the lunar cycle is roughly 29.5 days, a lunar year is only 354 days long. It falls short of the true solar cycle. It is mathematically deficient. Because of this built-in deficiency, a lunar calendar requires constant human intervention. It requires high priests to stand on the walls of Jerusalem, waiting to spot the first sliver of the new moon, declaring the start of a month based on frail, mortal observation. It requires the insertion of extra, entirely fabricated months to keep the seasons from drifting into chaos. The author of Jubilees viewed this human intervention with absolute, unyielding horror. God did not build the architecture of the cosmos, the precise movements of the celestial bodies, and the ironclad decrees of prophetic history, only to leave the keeping of time in the hands of corruptible, easily manipulated human beings. The Book of Jubilees reveals that the true, original calendar handed down to Moses in the burning darkness of Sinai was purely solar. It consisted of exactly 364 days. It was a masterpiece of divine mathematics. 364 is perfectly divisible by 7. This means there are exactly 52 weeks in a year. In this perfect heavenly grid, every single day, every single month, and every single holy festival falls on the exact same day of the week, every single year for all of eternity. There is no shifting. There is no human observation required. It is a rigid, perpetual motion machine, winding out the history of the universe. Why is this mathematical rigidity so terrifyingly important? Because the ancient Israelites did not view the temple in Jerusalem as merely a large stone building for religious gatherings. They understood it as a functional, scaled-down replica of the throne room of God. The earthly temple was a reflection of a massive, unseen heavenly architecture. The rituals, the burning of incense, and the spilling of blood on the altar were not merely symbolic acts to ease a guilty conscience. They were synchronized cosmic mechanisms. The Book of Jubilees details that the highest ranks of angels, the angels of the presence and the angels of sanctification, are bound to the exact same calendar. Imagine a massive, invisible clockwork spanning the distance between the mud of the earth and the highest heavens. When the earthly high priest sacrificed the lamb and poured its blood at the base of the altar on the exact day appointed by the solar calendar, millions of angelic beings in the heavenly temple were simultaneously falling to their faces, perfectly synchronized in a singular, universe-altering liturgy, as above, so below. The physical and the spiritual realms locked together, bridging the chasm between God and man. But if the earthly priests were following the shifting, chaotic phases of the moon, if they were off by even a single day, the connection was severed. The blood poured out on the earthly altar became utterly meaningless, a pathetic puddle of slaughter disconnected from the heavenly reality. The prayers of the nation bounced off a sky made of iron. They were performing the right rituals on the wrong days, effectively worshipping a god of their own timing. The Book of Jubilees prophesied this exact catastrophe with chilling precision. The angel of the presence warned Moses that the Israelites would forget the true calendar. They would blend the holy with the profane. They would look to the moon, adopt the chaotic counting of the pagan nations, and in doing so, they would become completely blind to the true timing of the universe. This blindness was not an accident. It was the result of a slow, deliberate infiltration, a creeping darkness that overtook the Second Temple period. After the Israelites returned from their long, crushing exile in Babylon, they brought the diseases of Babylon back with them. The lunar calendar was one of these infections. As the centuries ground on, the priesthood in Jerusalem became deeply compromised by politics, by the seductive philosophies of the invading Greeks, and eventually by the iron fist of the Roman Empire. The high priesthood ceased to be a sacred calling and became a political office, bought and sold with silver. These men, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, were pragmatists. They sought to appease the empires around them. And the empires operated on their own shifting, chaotic calendars. To maintain control over the masses, the corrupt religious elite suppressed the ancient, rigid solar calendar of Jubilees. The mathematical perfection of the 364-day year was a threat to their authority because it required no human king or corrupt priest to declare the changing of the months. The divine calendar functioned independently of their corrupt institutions. And so, the true timeline was buried. The sacred dates were altered. The synchronization with the angelic realm was intentionally broken. There was, however, one group that saw this darkness descending. A group that refused to bow to the corrupted temple in Jerusalem. We know them today as the Essenes, the mysterious architects of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Modern historical summaries often paint the Essenes as peaceful, ascetic monks, quietly copying scriptures in the desert, detached from the political realities of their time. This is a profound, almost laughable misunderstanding of their nature. The Essenes were not peaceful monks. They were radical, apocalyptic militants of the divine calendar. They were hardcore separatists who looked at the magnificent, gold-plated temple in Jerusalem, the temple that Jesus of Nazareth would later walk through, and saw nothing but a den of vipers, an illegitimate, demonically compromised institution. They believed the priests in Jerusalem were serving as blind guides, leading the entire nation into a state of perpetual spiritual defilement, because they had abandoned the solar calendar of Jubilees. The Essenes fled the holy city entirely. They retreated to the brutal, scorching wastelands of Qumran, near the poisonous shores of the Dead Sea. They did not go there merely to hide. They went there to prepare for an apocalyptic war. They believed that because the rest of the world, including the religious elite in Jerusalem, had lost the true calendar, the entire world was operating in darkness. The masses were asleep, deaf to the ticking of the cosmic clock, unaware that the judgments of God were aligning exactly according to the mathematically perfect cycles of the Jubilees. In the minds of the Essenes, the Book of Jubilees was not an alternative interpretation of history. It was the only history. It was the decoded master script of reality. While the Pharisees argued over endless microscopic laws of human tradition, the Essenes were mapping the movements of the Watchers, the fallen angelic beings who had originally corrupted humanity before the flood. They were calculating the exact years, the exact Jubilees, when the forces of darkness would be allowed to rise, and when the final, world-ending intervention of God would strike the earth like lightning. The Book of Jubilees effectively rewrites the Book of Genesis. Mainstream theologians often refer to Jubilees as Little Genesis, a title that completely undermines its terrifying authority. When you read Genesis in a modern Bible, you read a sweeping, often vague narrative. The dates are loose. The timeline feels distant, mythological, almost allegorical. But Jubilees removes the veil of allegory. It strips away the soft, storybook quality of the ancient world. It takes the events of Genesis and pins them down onto a ruthless, unforgiving chronological grid. It tells us the exact year, the exact month, and the exact day that the serpent whispered into the ear of Eve. It records the precise Jubilee when the blood of Abel soaked into the virgin soil of the earth, crying out for a vengeance that was mathematically recorded in the heavenly tablets. It tells us that the descent of the Watchers, the 200 fallen angels who abandoned their stations in the heavens to take human women, was not a random act of rebellion, but a calculated invasion that occurred in the exact days of Jared, locked into a specific Jubilee cycle. This is why the early church fathers and the later rabbinic councils were so terrified of this book. If the Book of Jubilees is true, then the Bible is not merely a collection of moral allegories or spiritual poetry meant to inspire us to be better people. If Jubilees is true, the ancient texts are hyper-accurate legal ledgers. They are the blueprints of a massive, ongoing, multidimensional war, and every single human being is caught in the crossfire of a timeline they can no longer perceive. By removing the precise dates, the authorities of the ancient world effectively neutralized the explosive power of the scriptures. They turned a terrifying prophecy into a safe, manageable religion. They blinded the eyes of the public to the structure of time itself. But the Essenes, hoarding the scrolls in the pitch-black caves of the desert, knew that the clock had not stopped. The heavens do not shift their schedule because mortal men lose the ability to read the dial. The implications of this forgotten timeline are staggering. If time is divided into strict predetermined jubilees, and if the major catastrophic shifts in human history, the flood, the scattering at Babel, the plagues of Egypt, all occurred on precise mathematical coordinates, then the future is equally locked. The end of days is not a fluid, unpredictable event waiting for humanity to reach a certain level of sin or a certain level of righteousness. It is a scheduled demolition. It is an appointment written in the heavenly tablets before the first atom of the universe was spoken into existence. And as we dig deeper into the mechanics of this forbidden text, we uncover an even darker reality. The Book of Jubilees does not just reveal the structure of time, it exposes the hidden entities that manipulate it. It pulls back the curtain on the unseen authorities, the malevolent forces that operate in the shadows of the earth, feeding on the ignorance of a humanity that has forgotten how to tell time. We are living in a world completely desynchronized from the divine reality, blindly stumbling through the dark. To grasp the sheer terror of our desynchronization, we must examine the object that Moses was actually shown in the suffocating darkness of Sinai. Modern religious art routinely depicts him holding two jagged, primitive pieces of granite, etched with a simple list of moral rules. But the Book of Jubilees describes something far more incomprehensible. Moses was granted access to the Luchot Ha-Shamayim, the heavenly tablets. To call this a book or a scroll is a catastrophic understatement. The heavenly tablets represent the unalterable source code of the universe. They are not merely a record of things that have happened. They are the ontological foundation of reality itself, a multi-dimensional ledger burning with divine fire, where every law, every physical constant, and every historical event is pre-written. The ancient Hebrew mind did not separate the physical from the spiritual. If a law was written on the heavenly tablets, it was not a suggestion. It was the gravity that held the stars together. It was the boundary that kept the oceans from swallowing the land. And written within this terrifying, burning ledger is the true, unfiltered history of the great cosmic breach, the event that shattered the original architecture of the earth. When you open the canonical book of Genesis to the 6th chapter, you are given a fleeting, almost maddeningly brief glimpse of a global catastrophe. It states simply that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they took wives for themselves, and that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days. It is 4 verses, 4 brief sentences to describe an event so horrific that it necessitated the total biological extermination of the planet. But the Book of Jubilees does not offer a brief summary. It pulls back the curtain and forces the reader to look directly into the abyss. It cross-references the heavenly tablets to give us the exact coordinates, the precise timeline of the invasion. According to Jubilees, this was not a spontaneous act of lust. It was a calculated, synchronized descent. The text explicitly names the perpetrators. They are not called angels in the generic, comforting sense. The ancient texts use the Aramaic and Hebrew terms irin, translated into Greek as egregoroi, the watchers, the ones who never sleep. These were not low-level messengers. These were entities of incomprehensible power, stationed at the very borders of the dimensional veil, tasked with observing and guiding the primitive development of mankind. They were the governors of the earthly grid. But in the days of Jared, a name that itself holds the ancient etymological root for the concept of descent, they abandoned their heavenly stations. The Book of Jubilees records that exactly 200 of these high-ranking cosmic administrators materialized in the physical realm, touching down on the blood-soaked summit of Mount Hermon. They did not arrive as ethereal, floating spirits. They manifested in the heavy, dense flesh of our reality, crossing a boundary that God had explicitly sealed. This was an act of high treason against the architecture of the cosmos. Their interaction with human women was not merely physical. It was a genetic and spiritual contamination of the highest order. The Watchers brought with them the forbidden knowledge of the heavenly realms, a premature unveiling of technologies and sorceries that humanity was never meant to possess. They taught mankind the cutting of roots, the manipulation of the Earth's natural properties to produce mind-altering, hallucinogenic compounds. They taught the forging of metals, transforming raw iron and bronze into swords, shields, and breastplates, initiating the endless, grinding cycle of human slaughter. They taught the art of cosmetics and the painting of the eyes, which, in the ancient context, was not about vanity, but about the seduction of the spiritual senses, a ritualistic preparation of the flesh for communion with the demonic. The Watchers traded the sacred, dangerous secrets of heaven for the mortal flesh of human women. And the offspring of this illicit, abominable union were the Nephilim. The word Nephilim is often casually translated in modern Bibles as giants, conjuring images of unusually tall men. This completely neuters the horror of the ancient Hebrew understanding. The root of the word comes from nephal, meaning to fall, or to cause others to fall violently. They were the fallen ones, the ones who bring ruin. The Book of Jubilees and the wider Enochic tradition describe them not merely as large humans, but as apex predators of a corrupted biology. They were cosmic aberrations, unnatural titans driven by an insatiable demonic hunger. They consumed the resources of the earth, and when the earth could no longer sustain them, They turned on humanity. They devoured men, they drank blood, and they shattered the natural order. They were the physical manifestation of the broken boundary between the divine and the mortal. Under their reign, the earth did not just suffer. It was biologically and spiritually weaponized against its creator. The blood of the innocent soaked deep into the ground, crying out to the heavenly tablets for a vengeance that was already mathematically scheduled. Mainstream theology teaches that God saw the wickedness of man, felt a profound emotional regret, and decided to send a flood of water to wash it all away. This emotional, reactionary view of the Creator completely contradicts the rigid, predestined reality of the Book of Jubilees. God does not react. God executes the code written before time began. The Great Flood was not an angry outburst. It was a scheduled cosmic reset. It was a surgical, hydrodynamic excision of a corrupted genetic line. The Jubilees text places the exact onset of the flood within its absolute mathematical grid. It details the precise month and the precise day when the fountains of the great deep were violently ruptured. The ancient Hebrews did not believe the earth was a floating globe in an empty vacuum. They understood it as a terrarium, a pocket of habitable space locked beneath a solid crystalline dome called the firmament, surrounded above and below by the chaotic, crushing waters of the abyss. The flood was not just a heavy rainstorm. It was the deliberate, temporary uncreation of the world. The architectural seals of the firmament were unlocked, and the primeval oceans of chaos were allowed to collapse back onto the earth, crushing the Nephilim under billions of tons of water and obliterating the contaminated biosphere. But water can only drown flesh. It cannot drown a spirit. And this is where the Book of Jubilees reveals a terrifying theological secret that the canonical texts obscure. When the Nephilim, these massive, unnatural hybrids, were crushed by the waters of the abyss, their physical bodies died. But their spirits were an amalgamation of human mortality and immortal angelic essence. Because they were not created by God, heaven rejected their spirits. Because they were born of earthly women, the abyss could not fully contain them. They became trapped in the physical realm, disembodied, invisible, and permanently starved of the physical sensations they once craved. These disembodied spirits of the dead Nephilim are what the ancient world and the New Testament refer to as demons. They are not fallen angels. They are the bastard ghosts of the ancient titans, endlessly roaming the earth, seeking human bodies to inhabit in order to satiate their eternal agonizing hunger. Following the receding of the floodwaters, as Noah and his family stepped out onto a sterile, violently altered planet, these invisible, malignant spirits immediately began to swarm the surviving humans. They induced madness, disease, and spiritual blindness. They whispered the old forbidden secrets back into the ears of Noah's grandchildren. Noah, terrified of this unseen plague, prayed to God, begging for these demonic entities to be locked away in the place of condemnation. And God, in his absolute sovereignty, commanded the archangels to bind all of these evil spirits and cast them into the abyss. But here, the Book of Jubilees presents a moment so chilling, so contrary to modern Christian and Jewish sensibilities, that it single-handedly explains why the text was suppressed. As the archangels prepared to bind the entire demonic horde, an entity stepped forward into the heavenly court. The Book of Jubilees names him Mastema. In the ancient Hebrew, Satan is merely a title, the adversary, the prosecutor. But Mastema is a proper name, rooted in the Hebrew word for animosity, hatred, and unyielding hostility. He is the chief of the spirits, the prosecuting attorney of the divine tribunal. And Mastema raised a legal objection before the throne of God. Mastema did not attack God. He did not launch a foolish, fiery rebellion. He appealed to the supreme, unalterable law of the heavenly tablets. He argued that humanity possessed free will, and therefore, they possessed the capacity for corruption. If all the demonic spirits were locked in the abyss, humanity would not face any true friction. There would be no test. The judicial system of the universe required a prosecuting force. Mastema spoke directly to the Creator, arguing that if some of these spirits were not left under his command, he would not be able to execute the power of his will on the sons of men to test their obedience to the cosmic law. In a modern, comforting theological framework, God would instantly banish Mastema for daring to speak, protecting his fragile human creations from any harm. But the God of Jubilees is a God of absolute, terrifying justice. He operates a cosmic courtroom of perfect weights and measures. God reviewed the legal claim of the Chief of Spirits, found it to be valid within the architecture of free will, and handed down a ruling that echoes into the very room you are sitting in right now. God commanded the archangels to bind 9/10 of the demonic spirits in the abyss, but he allowed 1/10 of the spirits of the dead Nephilim to remain on the earth under the direct command of Mastema, specifically to test, afflict, and corrupt humanity until the final judgment. This is not a fairy tale. This is a legally binding cosmic contract. You are living on a planet where a literal decimation of ancient predatory spirits was intentionally left behind, sanctioned by the Creator's own court, to serve as the grinding stone upon which human souls are tested. Mastema is not a cartoon villain ruling in hell. He is an authorized agent operating within the legal boundaries of the earthly realm. He was given jurisdiction. And how does one fall under the jurisdiction of Mastema? How does a human being become legally vulnerable to the predations of the 1/10? This brings us violently back to the calendar. The Book of Jubilees explicitly connects the protection of God with the adherence to the divine solar timeline. The Moedim, the appointed times, the Sabbaths, the Jubilee years, are not merely religious holidays. They are temporal safe zones. They are mathematical coordinates of divine jurisdiction. When an individual or a nation observes the appointed times exactly as they are written in the heavenly tablets, they align themselves with the angelic realm. They step under the covering of the angels of the presence. They are legally shielded from the prosecuting power of Mastema. But when humanity abandoned the solar calendar, when the corrupt priests in Jerusalem looked to the chaotic phases of the moon, and when the modern world adopted the pagan, Roman system of timekeeping, we did not just lose a few ancient traditions. We walked out of the fortress. By desynchronizing from the cosmic clock, humanity collectively stepped outside of divine jurisdiction. We wandered blindly into the temporal wilderness, right into the jaws of Mastema and his roaming, unseen army. The influence of these entities is not typically manifested in the cinematic, head-spinning exorcisms popularized by modern media. The Book of Jubilees describes a much more insidious, structural warfare. Mastema and his spirits govern through the slow, imperceptible corruption of systems. They operate by altering the collective frequency of human thought, because they are the disembodied remnants of the Nephilim, beings who originally corrupted the earth through forbidden technology and blood rituals. Their primary objective is to recreate the conditions of the pre-flood world. They whisper the blueprints of our own destruction into the minds of inventors, politicians, and philosophers. Every time humanity discovers a new method to slaughter itself on a mass scale, every time the boundaries of biology and natural law are violated in the name of progress, every time society normalizes the shedding of innocent blood on the altar of convenience, it is the direct, calculated result of the 1/10 fulfilling their contractual mandate. To truly comprehend the peril of our ignorance, we must examine the physical reality of how these unseen entities operate upon human biology, according to the ancient framework. The Book of Jubilees and the associated Dead Sea literature do not view demonic affliction as a purely psychological phenomenon, a mere imbalance of the mind to be cured by modern medicine. The ancient Hebrew perspective is terrifyingly somatic. The spirits of the 1/10, starved of the Nephilim flesh they once inhabited, seek the central nervous system of human beings as a literal mechanism of sensation. The ancient texts describe the human body as a biological tabernacle designed to house the breath of God. When an individual willfully steps outside the protective jurisdiction of the divine calendar, when they engage in the blood rituals, the idolatry, or the profound moral corruptions that Mastema orchestrates, they are effectively opening the gates of their own biological temple. The original language does not simply say a demon enters a person. The terminology used in the ancient Semitic languages implies a siege and an occupation. The spirit binds itself to the neural pathways, merging its ancient predatory consciousness with the human host. This is why the actions of the deeply corrupted often mirror the actions of the pre-flood titans. Insatiable greed, a drive for absolute dominance, and a complete sociopathic detachment from human empathy. The host is no longer entirely human. They are a biological puppet for a spirit that has hated humanity since the waters of the abyss crushed its original body. The theological friction this generates with modern religion is absolute. Modern theology has reduced the demonic to a metaphor for bad habits or systemic injustice. It has neutered the enemy, turning Mastema from a legal prosecutor with a legally binding army into a cartoonish symbol of negativity. This is the ultimate triumph of the one-tenth. The greatest trick the Chief of Spirits ever played was not convincing the world he didn't exist. It was convincing the world that the legal codes governing his existence, the calendar, the Jubilees, the strict, terrifying boundaries of the heavenly tablets, were obsolete traditions that no longer applied to a modern, enlightened humanity. By convincing the early church and the rabbinic councils to abandon the Book of Jubilees, Mastema effectively blinded the watchmen on the walls. He severed the communication lines between the earthly sanctuary and the heavenly temple. We are a species suffering from collective terminal amnesia, wandering through a war zone without armor, without a map, and without a clock. We assume the silence of the heavens is a sign of peace. But the Book of Jubilees warns us that the heavens are not silent. They are calculating. The angels of the presence are not resting. They are turning the massive burning pages of the cosmic ledger, ticking off the days, the weeks, and the Jubilees with merciless mathematical precision. The investigation into this forbidden text leads to a singular, horrifying conclusion. The world is not spinning out of control. It is operating exactly according to a script of unparalleled severity. The chaos we observe is not the absence of God. It is the scheduled release of the prosecuting entities, executing their contract upon a humanity that has forgotten the law. We are trapped in the crosshairs of a divine mechanism, and the hands of the clock are moving silently, ruthlessly, toward an hour that no human institution can delay, and no modern theology can explain away. The spirits of the ancient world are not dead. They are merely waiting for the final decree. The paradox that shatters modern theology is not merely that we have forgotten an ancient book, but that the entire structure of contemporary faith, whether Jewish, Christian, or secular, is built upon the deliberate, calculated suppression of the mechanics of reality. We are confronted with a theological impasse of terrifying proportions. Modern religion preaches a universe of infinite flexibility, a cosmos that bends to the emotional pleas of humanity, where God is a reactive entity, constantly adjusting his plans in response to human repentance or human sin. We are taught that time is an open canvas, and that our choices paint the future. But the Book of Jubilees, echoing from the dead silence of the Qumran caves, presents a cosmos of absolute, unyielding mathematical rigidity. It forces us to look upon a creator who is not merely a loving father, but an uncompromising cosmic architect who inscribed every judgment, every global catastrophe, and every demonic release onto the heavenly tablets before the first human lung ever drew breath. This presents an excruciating doctrinal paradox. If the history of the world is locked into a strict 52-week solar grid, divided into unalterable periods of 49 years, what is the purpose of human agency? If the exact jubilee of the flood, the exact year of the Exodus, and the exact hour of the final apocalypse were mathematically hard-coded into the architecture of the heavens, where does free will exist? To the modern Western mind, this level of predestination feels suffocating. It feels like a tyranny of mathematics. We recoil from the idea that we are walking through a labyrinth where every turn has already been documented in a burning celestial ledger. But the ancient Hebrew mind did not view this rigidity as a prison. They understood a profound, terrifying nuance that the modern world has entirely lost. The timeline is fixed, but the jurisdiction you choose to inhabit within that timeline is entirely up to you. The cosmic train is moving on an indestructible, unalterable track, and its final destination was determined before the stars were ignited. Free will is not the ability to change the direction of the train. Free will is the terrifying choice of whether you are sitting in the sanctuary of the divine calendar, under the protection of the angels of the presence, or whether you are wandering blindly on the tracks in the dark, waiting to be pulverized by the unstoppable machinery of God's scheduled judgments. To understand how humanity collectively decided to step off the train and stand in the dark, we must examine the most catastrophic theological hijacking in human history. We must look at the blood-soaked ashes of the 1st century. In the year 70 of the Common Era, the Roman legions under Titus breached the limestone walls of Jerusalem. The destruction of the Second Temple was not merely a military defeat. It was the collapse of the physical intersection between heaven and earth. The massive gold-plated sanctuary burned with such ferocity that the blood of the slaughtered priests literally hissed and boiled against the molten gold running down the steps of the altar. The physical mechanism of the cosmos, the sacrificial system that was meant to synchronize the earthly realm with the heavenly temple, was annihilated. The political and religious elite, the Sadducees who had collaborated with Rome, were virtually wiped out. The Essenes, the radical militants of the solar calendar who had hoarded the Book of Jubilees in the desert, were either slaughtered by the advancing legions or vanished into the suffocating dust of the Judean wilderness, sealing their scrolls in the dark caves of the Dead Sea, waiting for an apocalypse that seemed to have finally arrived. Only one major faction of the religious establishment survived the slaughter intact: the Pharisees. Fleeing the smoking ruins of Jerusalem, they reconvened in the coastal town of Yavne, a gathering historically known as the Council of Jamnia. As they sat in the ashes of their civilization, these pragmatic, legalistic scholars realized a terrifying truth. Without the temple, without the physical altar, the religion of ancient Israel was mathematically designed to evaporate. To survive the coming centuries of exile, they had to perform a radical theological amputation. They had to reinvent the religion from the ground up, transitioning it from a localized, temple-based cosmic synchronization into a portable, rabbinic, text-based tradition that could survive in the dark corners of the Roman Empire. To achieve this, they needed absolute uniformity. They needed control. And the greatest threat to that control was the apocalyptic, hyper-deterministic theology found in texts like the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees. The rabbis at Yavne knew that these texts bred rebellion. The Book of Jubilees taught that the religious establishment in Jerusalem had been utterly corrupted by abandoning the solar calendar, and that God's true timeline operated entirely independently of the priesthood. If the surviving Jews believed that a strict mathematical clock was ticking down to a violent apocalypse, they would never settle down. They would never submit to the new rabbinic authority. They would constantly attempt to rise up and fight the empires of the world, seeking to force the end of days. So the rabbinic authorities made a calculated, existential decision. They systematically buried the cosmic clock. They institutionalized the Babylonian lunar solar calendar, the very system of chaos and human observation that Jubilees condemned as a demonic contagion, making it the official timeline of the Jewish diaspora. By doing so, they transferred the power of timekeeping from the mathematically perfect architecture of the heavens directly into their own hands. The Sanhedrin, the human court, would now declare the new moons. The human court would insert the leap months. They explicitly decreed that even if the human court made a mathematical error in observing the moon, God himself would honor their mistake and adjust the heavenly schedules to match the earthly ruling. It was an astonishing, unprecedented usurpation of divine authority. They claimed jurisdiction over the calendar of God. In order to cement this new human-controlled reality, texts like the Book of Jubilees were strictly forbidden. They were cursed as heretical. The ancient, terrifying, solar-driven religion of the prophets was replaced by a sophisticated, bureaucratic system of human tradition. Simultaneously, a parallel mutation was occurring in the nascent movement of the early Christians. The earliest followers of Jesus of Nazareth were deeply entrenched in the apocalyptic worldview of the Second Temple period. They read the Book of Enoch. They understood the mechanics of the Watchers. They viewed the cosmos through the lens of a massive, ongoing spiritual war against the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. The Apostle Jude explicitly quoted the prophecies of Enoch in the canonical New Testament, treating them as absolute historical fact. The early believers understood that the world was operating under the hostile jurisdiction of Mastema, the chief of spirits, and that the coming kingdom of God was a literal, physical overthrow of that demonic occupation. But as the early church expanded beyond the borders of the Levant, spreading rapidly into the vast, sophisticated territories of the Greco-Roman world, it collided with a philosophical bedrock that fundamentally altered its DNA. The ancient Greek mind could not tolerate the raw, bloody, terrifyingly physical nature of the Hebrew spiritual realm. The Greeks were obsessed with the abstract. They were infatuated with Plato, with the concept of a pure, detached spiritual realm of forms, entirely separated from the dirty, corruptible flesh of the physical world. To the Hellenized mind, the idea of massive, hybrid Nephilim titans roaming the earth, or Watchers physically descending onto Mount Hermon to trade cosmic technology for human women, was grotesque. It sounded like primitive mythology, entirely beneath the dignity of their philosophical sophistication. A massive epistemological shift occurred. The foundational words of the ancient faith were translated, and in the translation, their terrifying gravity was lost. When the ancient Hebrew spoke the word Torah, they were not referring to a sterile list of religious rules. The root of the word implies an arrow hitting a physical mark. It was a tangible, directional reality. The Greeks translated it as nomos, a philosophical, abstract concept of law. When the Hebrews spoke of the sanctuary, they meant a literal intersection of dimensions where angels and men operated simultaneously. The Greeks reduced it to a metaphor for the human heart. The visceral, mechanical reality of the Book of Jubilees, where time, law, and spiritual warfare are locked into a mathematical grid, was suffocated by Greek allegory. The early theologians of the expanding church began to spiritualize the ancient texts. They taught that the Nephilim were not literal giants born of angels, but merely the offspring of a human tribe, the sons of Seth, marrying the daughters of Cain. It was a pathetic, intellectually dishonest rationalization designed to make the ancient texts palatable to Roman aristocrats and Greek philosophers. This Hellenization laid the groundwork for the ultimate institutional hijacking. In the year 325, the Roman Emperor Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea. This was the moment the persecuted, apocalyptic sect of the early Christians was absorbed into the iron machinery of the Roman Empire. Constantine was not a theologian seeking the ancient truth. He was an emperor seeking absolute political cohesion. He worshipped Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. He needed a unified state religion to glue his fracturing empire together, and the endless, localized theological disputes of the Christian bishops were a threat to his authority. At Nicaea, the church did not just debate the nature of Christ, they debated the mechanics of time. The early Eastern branches of the church had still maintained elements of the ancient calendar, celebrating the resurrection according to the precise dates of the Hebrew Passover. But Constantine and the Roman bishops despised this dependency on a Jewish timeline. They viewed it as politically humiliating and culturally foreign. In a move of staggering ecclesiastical arrogance, the Council of Nicaea formally severed the Christian calendar from its ancient biblical roots. They constructed a new, entirely fabricated method for calculating the holiest days of the year, based on the vernal equinox and a mathematically convoluted artificial lunar cycle. They created a hybrid calendar, blending the administrative efficiency of the Roman solar year with the chaotic, shifting lunar calculations of the pagan world. The Book of Jubilees had explicitly warned that abandoning the 364-day solar calendar would lead humanity to mix the holy with the profane, to observe the appointed times on the wrong days, and to become completely blind to the synchronization of the heavenly temple. And this is exactly what the unified Roman Church institutionalized on a global scale. They did not just change a few dates on a parchment. They altered the entire frequency of the Western world. By declaring that the Church possessed the divine authority to manipulate the calendar, the institution assumed the role of the ultimate gatekeeper between God and humanity. This is the crux of why the Book of Jubilees had to remain buried beneath the sands of the desert. The theology of Jubilees is intensely, violently anti-institutional. If the calendar is a permanent, mathematical absolute dictated by the angels of the presence, requiring no observation of the moon, no decree from a Sanhedrin, and no papal bull from a Roman bishop, then the individual believer has direct, unmediated access to the rhythm of the cosmos. If you know the mathematics of the 364-day year, you know exactly when the doors of the heavenly temple swing open. You do not need a priest to tell you when God is listening. The democratization of divine access through ancient mathematics is the ultimate threat to any institution whose power relies on being the exclusive toll booth to heaven. Both the rabbinic authorities and the Roman ecclesiastical machinery, separated by mutual hatred and centuries of bloodshed, quietly agreed on one fundamental necessity: the absolute suppression of the Enochic and Jubilean timelines. The text was not lost by accident. It was deliberately starved of oxygen, left uncopied, banned from the synagogues, and declared anathema by the cathedrals. It was a synchronized, systemic erasure of the divine mathematics. But the suppression of the calendar is not merely a historical tragedy of lost knowledge. It is a present, ongoing spiritual catastrophe. We must examine the terrifying mechanics of what it actually means to operate off the clock. According to the Book of Jubilees, the Modim, the appointed times, the Sabbaths, and the festivals are not arbitrary days of rest or historical memorials. They are dimensional open doors. They are the specific, localized moments in the space-time continuum where the veil between the physical earth and the heavenly court is mechanically thinned. When the ancient priests, operating on the exact 364-day solar calendar, offered the blood of the sacrifice on the precise day, it was not the blood itself that saved them. It was the alignment. They were inserting a key into a lock at the exact millisecond the tumblers aligned. The prayers of the earthly congregation synchronized perfectly with the liturgy of the millions of angelic beings falling on their faces in the celestial sanctuary. The connection was instantaneous, devastating, and entirely functional. Now consider the horrifying reality of the modern world. For nearly 2,000 years, billions of human beings have performed sacred rituals, poured out their hearts in desperate prayer, and observed solemn high holy days, relying entirely on the calendars drafted by Roman emperors and rabbinic councils. They are observing the Passover, the Day of Atonement, the Resurrection, and the Pentecost on dates that, according to the heavenly tablets, are absolutely mathematically vacant. They are standing in the physical space of the sanctuary, but they are completely out of phase with the temporal reality of the heavenly court. They are screaming into a disconnected receiver. They are performing profound, deeply emotional acts of worship on days when the massive, invisible doors of the celestial temple are locked shut. It is the spiritual equivalent of an army firing its artillery barrage an hour after the enemy has already left the battlefield. The energy is expended, the devotion is real, but the target is entirely missed. This temporal dislocation creates a terrifying vulnerability. The ancient Hebrew mind understood a concept deeply unsettling to modern ears: anomia. We translate this Greek word simply as lawlessness, conjuring images of criminals breaking secular laws. But in the ancient spiritual context, anomia is an ontological state of being outside the architecture of reality. It is to exist in a space where the protective gravity of the divine law does not apply. When humanity was manipulated into abandoning the divine solar calendar, we did not just make a scheduling error. We collectively stepped into a state of structural anomia. We walked out from under the protective umbrella of the angels of the presence, straight into the open, unprotected wilderness of time. And this wilderness is not empty. This is the exact operational environment that Mastema and his legion of disembodied Nephilim spirits require. Because they are the ghosts of beings who shattered the boundaries of the original creation, They thrive in the chaotic spaces where the divine boundaries have been forgotten. Mastema does not need to manifest physically to destroy a society. He does not need to possess individuals in dramatic, cinematic displays of supernatural strength to achieve his legal mandate. The Book of Jubilees reveals a far more sophisticated, bureaucratic form of spiritual warfare. Mastema governs by managing the blind spots. If Mastema can keep humanity operating on a false timeline, he accomplishes two catastrophic objectives simultaneously. First, he successfully cuts off the mass of humanity from the protective, synchronizing power of the true appointed times. The human race is effectively disarmed, stripped of its ability to participate in the cosmic liturgy that binds the prosecuting entities. Second, and far more insidiously, Mastema is able to harvest the misdirected spiritual energy of the human race. When millions of people engage in deep spiritual focus, fasting, and ritual on dates that align with the pagan, lunar, solar, or Roman calendars historically tied to the worship of celestial bodies, imperial emperors, and chaotic deities, where does that spiritual energy go? It does not reach the locked doors of the heavenly sanctuary. It is intercepted. The entities that rule the principalities of the air, the governors of the false timeline, absorb the devotion of a blinded humanity. We are unwittingly fueling the very infrastructure of the dark realm, feeding the spirits of the ancient titans with the sheer force of our desynchronized worship. We have been tricked into building the prison walls of our own reality. The doctrinal paradox reaches its breaking point when we confront the modern Christian or Jewish believer with this ancient text. To accept the Book of Jubilees is to accept that the majority of human religious history for the last 2 millennia has been a profound, orchestrated error. It forces the agonizing realization that the institutions we trusted to guide our souls have been functioning as blind guides, carefully managing a corrupted ledger, ensuring that the masses never look up to see the true movement of the stars. It demands a total re-evaluation of the nature of God, stripping away the soft, therapeutic deity of modern sermons and revealing the terrifying, unyielding monarch of the heavenly tablets. But the most chilling aspect of this paradox is the absolute silence of the mechanism. The true solar calendar, the 364-day grid of the universe, did not cease to exist simply because humanity stopped observing it. The mathematics of God do not require human participation to function. The clock did not stop. Deep within the architecture of the unseen realm, the angels of the presence are still turning the massive, burning pages of the cosmic ledger. They are still ticking off the days, the weeks, and the jubilees with merciless precision. The scheduled appointments are still occurring. The doors of the heavenly temple are still opening and closing in perfect rhythm. And the predetermined coordinates for the final execution of judgment are advancing closer with every rotation of the earth. Humanity is dancing in the dark, entirely unaware that the music stopped centuries ago, and that the courtroom is silently filling with the prosecuting entities preparing for the final hour. We look down at the glowing, sterile screens of our devices, synchronizing our daily lives to atomic clocks that measure the microscopic decay of isotopes, and we succumb to the ultimate modern arrogance. We believe that we are the absolute masters of the timeline. We believe that because we can measure the friction of a second with cold, scientific precision, we have somehow conquered the mystery of time itself. But an atomic clock can only tell you the duration of a moment. It cannot tell you the spiritual weight of the hour. We are counting the seconds on a ship that is quietly drifting toward a massive, inescapable waterfall in the dark. The consequences of our collective amnesia regarding the divine solar calendar are not merely historical or academic. They are intensely prophetic. They are bleeding directly into our present reality, and they are setting the stage for the most violently misunderstood eschatological event in the history of the cosmos. To comprehend what the immediate future holds, we must understand the fundamental architecture of biblical prophecy. The modern church has largely embraced a chaotic, emotionally driven view of the end times. We are taught to look for vague, shifting signs, earthquakes, political rumors, social decay, as if God is waiting for the world to reach a certain subjective boiling point of human wickedness before he finally loses his patience and pulls the trigger on the apocalypse. This reactionary theology completely violates the rigid mathematical nature of the heavenly tablets. The Book of Jubilees annihilates the concept of a spontaneous emotional judgment. The end of days is not a reaction to human behavior. It is a scheduled appointment. It is an immovable coordinate locked into the celestial grid before the foundation of the world. The mechanism of this countdown is encoded in the very name of the forbidden text, the Jubilee. In the ancient Levitical law, the Jubilee, the Yovel in the original Hebrew, was not simply a religious festival. It was a brutal, uncompromising economic and social reset. The law dictated that time was to be counted in sevens, 7 cycles of 7 years, totaling 49 years. And then, on the Day of Atonement in the 50th year, the high priest was commanded to take a ram's horn and sound a massive, deafening blast across the entire land of Israel. At the exact moment that horn echoed through the valleys, a terrifying legal reality was instantly enforced. Every debt was cancelled. Every slave was immediately freed. And most importantly, every piece of land that had been sold, stolen, or surrendered was forcibly returned to its original divinely appointed owner. There was no negotiation. There was no appeal. It was an absolute instantaneous restoration of the original order. But the ancient Hebrews did not view the Jubilee merely as a civic law for desert nomads. They understood it as a fractal, a smaller physical representation of a massive cosmic reality. The entire history of the earth is governed by a master Jubilee cycle. The Book of Jubilees implies that humanity has been granted a specific, predetermined number of these Jubilee periods. The earth itself is currently under a state of cosmic lease. When Adam broke the original covenant, he surrendered the dominion of the earth to the hostile, unseen entities of the spiritual realm. For millennia, humanity has been operating under the crushing debt of sin, living as spiritual slaves on a planet occupied by the parasitic forces of Mastema and the disembodied spirits of the ancient Titans. We are living on foreclosed property, governed by illegitimate demonic landlords. But the lease has a hard expiration date. The final apocalypse, the terrifying climax of the Book of Revelation, is not the destruction of the earth. It is the ultimate cosmic jubilee. It is the scheduled eviction. When the appointed mathematics of the heavenly tablets are fulfilled, when the final 49-year cycle grinds to its exact predestined conclusion, the angelic horn will not be sounded by a mortal priest in Jerusalem. It will be sounded by the angel of the presence in the highest dimensions of the heavenly court. And at that exact millisecond, the legal jurisdiction of Mastema and the 1/10 will be instantaneously, violently revoked. The earth will be forcibly reclaimed by its original creator. The apocalypse is not a chaotic explosion of divine anger. It is a highly regimented, violently enforced property reclamation. It is the execution of a cosmic warrant. This absolute mathematical certainty is precisely what the forces of darkness are desperately trying to obscure. If you know that your eviction is mathematically guaranteed, and you know the exact time it will occur, your entire strategy changes. This brings us to the terrifying prophecy buried in the 7th chapter of the Book of Daniel. Daniel was granted a vision of the final, beast-like empire that would consume the earth at the end of days. He described an entity, a final antichrist figure, who would speak arrogant words against the Most High, who would wear down the saints, and who would attempt something profoundly sinister. The ancient text states, "He will intend to change times and laws." For centuries, theologians have debated the meaning of this bizarre phrase. Many assume it refers to a dictator changing political holidays or rewriting secular constitutions. But read through the lens of the Book of Jubilees, Daniel's prophecy becomes a chilling, hyper-specific warning about chronological warfare. The ultimate deception of the enemy is chronomancy, the manipulation of time itself. The beast system does not just want to rule the geography of the earth, it wants to rule the schedule of reality. By finalizing the destruction of the 364-day divine solar calendar, by convincing the entire human race to operate on the Gregorian, Roman, and corrupted lunar timelines, the enemy has successfully changed the times and the laws. The horrific consequence of this chronological sabotage is that the vast majority of the modern religious world will be looking in the wrong direction, on the wrong days, for the return of the King. Jesus of Nazareth stood on the Mount of Olives and wept over the city of Jerusalem, uttering a devastating judgment. They would be destroyed because they did not recognize the time of their visitation. They were blind to the mode, the appointed time. They had the scriptures, they had the temple, but because they were following the corrupted calendar of the Pharisees, they completely missed the exact, mathematically scheduled arrival of the Messiah. History is a cycle, and the final generation is repeating the exact same catastrophic error on a global scale. Today, millions of believers are obsessively scanning the news, attempting to decode ancient prophecies using the Gregorian calendar, desperately trying to calculate the timing of the rapture or the tribulation, while completely ignoring the solar mechanics of the cosmos. They are waiting for a train while standing in the wrong station, looking at a broken watch. When the final world-ending judgments begin to fall, they will not fall randomly. They will align perfectly with the true, hidden modim. They will strike on the exact, mathematically precise appointed times of the 364-day calendar. And because the modern church is completely desynchronized from that ancient rhythm, the events of the apocalypse will strike them as an incomprehensible, terrifying ambush. They will be caught entirely unawares, asleep in the middle of a war zone. While humanity slumbers in this temporal illusion, the 1/10, the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim under the command of Mastema, are operating with a feverish, accelerating intensity. They know exactly what time it is. They can read the unseen clock. They know that their lease is expiring, and their final objective is to cause maximum devastation before the trumpet of the ultimate Jubilee sounds. But they are not innovating. Demonic entities are incapable of true creation. They can only pervert, corrupt, and recreate. Their eschatological endgame is to perfectly recreate the conditions of the earth just prior to the Great Flood. Jesus explicitly warned that the days of the coming of the Son of Man would be exactly like the days of Noah. This is not a metaphor for people simply ignoring God and enjoying their lives. To say that the end will be like the days of Noah is to invoke the darkest, most terrifying chapter of the heavenly tablets. The days of Noah were characterized by the complete shattering of the biological and spiritual boundaries of the earth. It was an era of illicit technology, DNA corruption, and the intermingling of the human and the demonic. The Watchers descended to hybridize the human race, attempting to create a species made in their own monstrous image, completely cutting off the bloodline of humanity from its creator. Look closely at the trajectory of the modern, technocratic world. We are rapidly approaching a singularity where biology and technology are becoming indistinguishable. The modern obsession with transhumanism, the drive to alter human DNA, to merge the human nervous system with artificial intelligence, to achieve digital immortality and sever the consciousness from the fragile mortal body, is not a triumph of modern science. It is the ancient Nephilim protocol, repackaged and whispered into the minds of modern engineers by the very same spirits that taught the cutting of roots and the forging of metals before the flood. The enemy knows that the final judgment is a physical dimensional intersection. By manipulating humanity into willingly corrupting its own genetic code, by convincing us to merge our biology with iron and silicon, the forces of Mastema are attempting to build an unredeemable species. They are trying to create a modern Nephilim, a generation of beings that are no longer fully human, and therefore no longer legally eligible for the redemption offered by the blood of the cosmic sacrifice. They are weaponizing the architecture of our own bodies against the coming Jubilee. The prophetic convergence is absolute. We have a humanity completely blind to the divine calendar, operating in a state of structural anomia, entirely oblivious to the mathematical proximity of the final countdown. Simultaneously, we are witnessing the exact replication of the pre-flood conditions, the rapid acceleration of forbidden technology, the deep corruption of human biology, and a global society that celebrates the shedding of innocent blood with the exact same sociopathic detachment as the ancient titans. The gears of the corrupted world are perfectly meshing with the blueprints of the abyss. The illusion of our endless progression is shattering. The empty corridor of modern time is compressing. The invisible boundary that separates the heavy dying matter of this earth from the blinding, terrifying reality of the heavenly court is thinning to a microscopic edge. The mathematical grid of the Book of Jubilees demands that the clock does not stop. It does not rewind, and it cannot be bargained with. The angels of the presence have not abandoned their posts. They are standing at the absolute precipice of the dimensional veil, their hands resting on the seals of reality, watching the final grains of sand slip through the hourglass of a timeline we were strictly forbidden to forget. The atmosphere is heavy. The air is charged with the static electricity of an impending collision, and the silence of the heavens is about to be broken. The great tragedy of modern existence is the sterilization of our terror. We have engineered a society that shields us from the raw, unyielding elements of the earth, and in doing so, we have convinced ourselves that we are equally insulated from the mechanics of the heavens. We sit in climate-controlled rooms, surrounded by concrete and glass, staring at artificial lights, believing that the ancient darkness has been permanently banished by human intellect. We have replaced the fear of God with the illusion of control. But the fear of God is not a primitive superstition to be outgrown. It is the only rational response to the true nature of reality. It is the bone-deep, paralyzing realization that the universe is not a chaotic accident of physics, nor is it a benevolent nursery designed for our emotional fulfillment. It is a courtroom, and the judge is not a human construct of infinite tolerance. He is the terrifying, burning architect of the heavenly tablets, a sovereign force whose decrees are executed with the cold, crushing precision of a falling star. When you strip away the layers of theological comfort, when you discard the sanitized sermons and the politically motivated calendars of Rome and Babylon, you are left standing naked before the mountain of Sinai. You are forced to look up into the thick, impenetrable darkness where the angel of the presence dictates the architecture of time. The Book of Jubilees does not offer us a path to personal empowerment. It offers a mirror reflecting our absolute, terrifying fragility. We are dust and breath, wandering through a dimensional war zone, blindly crossing the battle lines of ancient, predatory entities that view our biology as nothing more than a mechanism for their own dark consumption. We have spent 2 millennia marching to the rhythm of a broken clock, feeding the principalities of the air with our misdirected devotion, entirely ignorant of the massive turning gears of the cosmic jubilee. Every breath we take is a subtraction from a finite, unalterable ledger. The hubris of man is to believe that because the blade has not yet fallen, the executioner has fallen asleep. But the executioner does not sleep. The watchers do not sleep. And the creator of the celestial calendar operates outside the agonizing, slow crawl of our mortal perception. To him, the millennia of human suffering and rebellion are but the turning of a single page in the heavenly tablets. The ultimate horror of the forbidden timeline is not simply that the apocalypse is scheduled, but that human rebellion is entirely futile. We believe our technological advancements and our philosophical enlightenments are pushing back the boundaries of divine authority. We believe that by editing our genetic code, by merging our consciousness with the digital abyss, and by redefining the laws of nature, we are somehow escaping the gravitational pull of the Creator. But the heavenly tablets account for all of it. Every act of hubris, every corrupted technological breakthrough, every drop of innocent blood spilled in the name of progress was already calculated in the mathematics of the end. Mastema and his legion of disembodied spirits are not disrupting the plan. They are unwitting cogs in the very machinery they despise, executing their legal mandate to test a humanity that has willfully chosen the darkness. The trap was set before the foundation of the world, and we have walked into it with our eyes wide open, applauding our own destruction. There is no negotiation with the mathematics of God. You cannot plead ignorance to a law that is written into the foundational fabric of the earth. When the final 49-year cycle concludes, when the true, unalterable appointed time arrives, there will be no diplomatic warnings. The sky will not slowly change color to give humanity time to adjust its philosophy. The transition will be instantaneous, violent, and absolute. The dimensional veil will simply be torn away, and the physical reality we thought was so solid, so permanent, will evaporate like mist in the heat of a burning sun. The entities that rule the shadows of our world will be instantly stripped of their jurisdiction, and the earth will be forcibly repossessed by the terrifying glory of its original owner. Every empire, every financial institution, every monument of human pride will be ground into less than dust. The concept of time itself, as we understand it, will be fundamentally shattered. We will not be judged by the calendars of men, nor will we be weighed against the moral relativism of our corrupted age. We will be measured against the uncompromising, solar-driven perfection of a timeline we were arrogant enough to throw away. You are not living in the age of grace as an excuse for chronological blindness. You are living in the final agonizing seconds of a suspended sentence. The angels of the presence are standing in the celestial sanctuary, their hands holding the final seals, waiting for the exact, mathematically perfect millisecond to execute the eviction of the current age. The history of the world is a closed loop, and the end is rapidly converging upon the beginning. The forbidden timeline remains unbroken. The cosmic clockwork, hidden beneath the sands of the desert and buried by the institutions of men, continues to turn with ruthless, silent perfection. There is no escape from the grid. There is only the ticking of the unseen dial, and the terrifying certainty that the hour is already upon us. The darkness is not empty. It is waiting.